My name is Jeremy, and this is Good Beer Matters.
I started to see a huge gap with beer education. There's not good enough communication between a brewery and the consumer. One is the language barrier. Two is I think the visual beer education helps a lot in bridging those gaps.
When we think about beer and beer culture, our thoughts naturally drift toward the classics and the current global beer hotspots. But as we look to the future, this is all going to change. My next guest is one of these change makers and the first Advanced Cicerone in India. A great experience lies at the intersection of craft and culture. These are the stories of us, of great food and the beer that brings it all together. For the craft and culture of beer, this is episode 118 of Good Beer Matters with Advanced Cicerone, Anudeep, Mutyala. All right, so welcome to season 6 of the Good Beer Matters podcast, where we begin a worldwide virtual tour of the beer experience. And so now, if any of you are listening to this, just know that we are also doing this. We, meaning me, are doing this in video as well. So you can also go watch this if you're listening to this, and vice versa. But we're starting out this new season. The theme is, what is the beer experience from around the world? And today I've got a colleague, an Advanced Cicerone, someone I've had the pleasure of studying with and training with remotely, of course. But Anudeep, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background in beer.
Jeremy, thanks for having me on the podcast. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for that. I'm Anudeep. I'm a beer educator and a fellow Advanced Cicerone, and I'm a BJCP judge, judge in beer competition, commercial, and homebrew. I've been exploring beer from the last 5 or 6 years, and I was a mechanical engineer, made a career switch. I decided to go full time on beer, so here we are.
Yeah, there's a number of people who go off and do what makes sense on paper, but somehow they just get sucked into the tractor beam of beer. And here, both you and I are in that same vein. Um, so you said you're also a beer educator. Tell us a little bit about your website and the beer education you do, and most importantly, where you do it. I want a little bit of a kind of a geographic context here.
Yeah, so I lived in the US for 5 years, and when I went back to India in 2019, I went back to this place called Bangalore in the state of Karnataka in the southern part of India. Uh, Most people think it's more like a craft beer capital of India because it has a lot of microbreweries than any other state. So I moved to Bangalore and started exploring beers and started going out to breweries, talking to the brew pub owners, and trying to really understand what's the culture's like and what people are drinking. And uh, I've been doing that from the last 3 years, and I started to see a huge gap where with beer education, there's not good enough communication between a brewery and the consumer. And I thought I could I could really close the gap with the beer education. So I started out offering my services to breweries and just in with the beer education, staff training, trying to help people understand beer better because like most of the people in India have never been exposed to these different diversified beer styles, and they've never had many classic examples of styles because we don't have that availability of imports as much. And uh, there are people from different cultural backgrounds. So, in India is like a big hub for different cultures and languages. And so we have a lot of barriers, language barriers, cultural barriers. So as a beer educator, it was quite a challenge to really get past that and to see to what's the best way to communicate with different cultures, and like how can I relate to these people better. So I was I was trying to like improve my expression of the way I describe beer to these people from
Hmm.
different cultural backgrounds. Yeah, staff training with sensory tasting beers, and just trying to improve communication from a staff to a consumer. Like, how can you put it uh, in a way where that it makes sense and it's not like you're not narrating the entire history of the consumer. You're just like being fast, being quick, but also being effective in delivering what that beer is about. And most of the time, we have a big challenge that in a the restaurants, like especially on the weekends, it's a fast paced environment, so you don't have a lot of time to talk to the consumer. So like, how are you gonna make it more effective?
Yeah.
So one thing that I noticed that people are missing was there's that nobody is asking questions.
So
Like you, yeah.
I have a question to ask you if I can. One of the things, one of the topics of conversation that has come up in the past that I find really fascinating because it really speaks to the different nuances of culture. And one example it came up with is, when we talk about beers with Brettanomyces, oftentimes we'll describe it as goaty or barnyard, or I think of it as I get leather and like rodeo smells and aromas out of that. But if someone is from the inner city or from a different culture, they've never smelled hay, they've never smelled rodeo, they've never been around horses or anything that we're known for especially in the western part of the U.S. It'd be the same thing. It is like, someone trying to describe this is what this downtown major metropolis city smells like after a rain. But if you've never been there, if you've grown up in the countryside, then that means nothing to you. How have you translated? Given you're in a center of hub of cultures and languages and different experiences, how do you translate these aromas and these flavors to these different experiences?
Some of that is by letting them taste that example that you have in front of you and trying to let's say if that's a fruit, and then we have like a different set of fruits, like if you're talking about citrus fruit being more specific, okay, it's orange, so what kind of orange? So being more specific and letting them try the exact things, like if that's a fruit or that's a spice or herb, flower. So but I think the biggest thing is I felt was the language barrier in
Mm-hmm.
terms of communicating the beer flavors. So if you talk about orange or clove, banana, there are people that do not get it. Like they come from different backgrounds, and English is not their first language. So
Okay.
they
Yeah.
grew up culturally in their own native. They know what it is in their native language. So I gotta really get in there to show them the pictures, and then it clicks. Okay, this is what you mean by banana. So one is the language barrier, and two is I think the visual beer education helps a lot in bridging those gaps. And it's not just one thing, right? So we have like a window of flavors that you got to talk about. It's not just like you said with Brettanomyces. It's not just like horsey. It's you got to be like given more like a wider range of descriptions so that
Yeah.
they can relate to at least one or two of those at the end of the day. So I always try to look for like a set of descriptors to see if that if any of those descriptors click for them. So it's not easy. Even I'm in the beginning of this journey of trying to make the communication better, and especially if you're from a different cultural background, it's not as easy. So you got to be switching to this visual beer education, trying to make sense with the pictures, trying to make sense with the videos, trying to make sense with the actual product, tasting the actual product in front of you. So yeah.
And it seems to me there's a certain degree of acquiescence that you must give into to be comfortable with nonverbal communication. We're talking about aroma, we're talking about flavor. We, Anudeep, you and I could be talking about a song. We could play a song right now, whatever that song is. But if we're both digging it and our heads are kind of moving with the beat, then we're both feeling that same experience. But we don't have to really talk about it. I think just being okay with that nonverbal communication. And I thought you put it perfectly. Is like it's hard for me to describe banana. It's hard for me. Some of my favorite flavors that I'll find in beer sometimes are starfruit, or lychee, or tamarind. When I find those, oh god, I just love them. But it's hard for me to describe them to an American who's never experienced them before. And I do the best I
Exactly.
can to. It's like here's a color you've never seen. It looks like this. I'll do the best I can, but you just have to experience it yourself, and then we'll nod afterwards, right?
The perfect example would be skunk. I always had trouble, like when Northern America describes the light struck beers as skunky, I had no
Mm-hmm.
idea because we don't have skunks in Asia. So it's hard to relate to skunk spray. And so I never smelled it, and I don't know what it is. And then when I started tasting the beers in those green bottles, and when I did the sensory off flavor practice, and then okay, there's this weird aroma that I think I know it's off, but I don't know what it is. And then I
Yeah,
started to make memory and say, okay, this might be skunk. So
yeah, and that is a wonderful off flavor to not have personal experience with. So tell me a little bit more about the current state of beer in India. I mean, the hot spots that everyone talks about. Germany, Belgium, the UK, even the US these days. But when it comes to India, the first thought in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, but is not, ooh, what a great beer culture. But help me understand the reality of beer culture in India.
yeah, uh, I mean, I've heard from a few people that they don't even think that Indians drink beer. So, so I mean, either it
uh,
was not known at all,
oh boy.
it hasn't been published anywhere, or there might be a lot of blurry lines in the history about the culture of beer in India. But I'm sure India has been one of the Asian countries that has a culture of drinking. I wouldn't specifically say it's beer, but alcoholic beverages, the fermented
Hmm.
beverages. We've had a lot of old historic references that dates many, many thousands of years back. But when it comes to beer, I think from what I know, especially if you look at 1970s and 80s, the commercial beer was ruling the market, the entire market of India. So you're talking about like a population of 1 billion people drinking just commercial light lagers. Uh, from 60s and 70s, there were a lot of competition in the commercial sector, and then craft beer is pretty young. I would say that the first known brewery that was established was in 2008. So we're like
So very
probably
young.
15, 13 years old. So it's so young. And there were no microbrewery laws with the excise, so people had to really sit down with the excise and write those laws for microbreweries in 2006 and 2007. So then the culture has like I wouldn't call it shifted, but like if you look at the people drinking beers in the rural versus urban cities, there always has been a difference. So in the urban cities, you get some import beers, and whereas in rural cities, like you just drink commercial beers. And then I've noticed the microbreweries started popping up in the major cities, and uh, people were making a switch from the commercial beer to craft beer in a sense where they could get the same thing from a microbrewery. So they were preferring. So there are different set of audience, right? So there are people who wants a strong beer. They don't care what it is. They'll just go to the brewery and ask for a strong beer. That's all. That's all they want. And there are people that want something that mimics the taste of a commercial beer because they
Okay.
don't know what these beers are. And
Because they
with
want beer flavored beer, right?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were making a leap, but not too much of a leap. And they were like, okay, so I know my commercial beer, and as long as I'm getting that kind of taste in your in a microbrewery, I'm fine with it. So they kind of like pivoted to drinking commercial lagers to craft lagers. These are like, I'm not talking about Pilsner or Helles. The microbreweries at the time started to make the same commercial beers, but in a small scale. So, and then there was a transition into Belgian wit, Hefeweizen. So people
Hmm.
started drinking that. And I think it's largely driven by what's available in your imported beer brands. So I think at the time, Hoegaarden was one of the brands that has been established in India for some time, and people are aware of what kind of beer that is. And then when breweries started making Belgian wits, they felt related to that, and they were drinking Belgian wits. And I mean, even right now in 2022, Belgian wit is the most consumed craft beer in any microbrewery. I would say that because everywhere you go, to any microbrewery, you walk into any microbrewery, Belgian wit is, you can't. I mean, everyone brews Belgian wit,
Yeah.
and
That's a good
so
problem to have.
it's a good problem to have. But
Yeah.
uh, I don't know how long that. I mean, I still think it's a trend. Like we all go through different trends, right? So
Sure.
IPAs and so I think in India the current trend is Belgian wit and has been from the last decade. My only concern is uh, if you get too comfortable in Belgian wits and you would not explore any other beer styles.
Yeah. If you get too used to Belgian wits, then there goes any opportunity for like a double IPA or a Russian Imperial Stout or something like that. That's just pretty aggressive when you're accustomed to Belgian wit,
If all
right?
you know is Belgian wit and you feel comfortable only with it, like with the communication, so you don't want to sound like a inexperienced person, and you're like, okay, I should sound like I know my beer, and you walk into a brewery and you just all you know is Belgian wit, and you just keep
Yeah.
ordering the same thing.
Yeah. Interesting. So along that vein, culturally speaking, how does the overall culture, different aspects of the culture, we're talking like the religion, the politics, even social hierarchies, how does that affect the choice to everyone start drinking instead of the mass-produced lager? Now we're drinking Belgian wit and other aspects. I mean, how does that culture unpack itself like that?
So I would say one of the things that drove the microbreweries is um, having a set of new excise laws which allowed breweries to start up in these major cities, and that kind of gave an exposure to people about these different styles of beer. And also there wasn't many imported beers 20 30 years back, and with the set of excise laws, I think there were people coming in from different markets with these some of these classic examples. Although they didn't taste great because of the storage and transit conditions,
Yeah.
but we had exposure to different beers. But the biggest challenge, I think, not a lot of things changed. Even the reason you see craft beer emerging in India in 2008 is the excise laws haven't been changed from the longest time. So people had to really fight with the excise and say like, hey, this is what we want to do, and this is how we are different from the commercial beers. So that was a big challenge. So that's the reason why I think we were way behind in catching up with this culture of craft beers. So it's more like old school, traditional, uh, culturally, like it hasn't changed at all until 2000, like early or late 2000s. So now it started to make more sense because the culture has been expanding, and we have more breweries showing up, more people trying different beers. So India is a country rich in spices, and we have different like different fruits than what you get in any other country. So we
Hmm.
and they're like brewers trying to represent India in their beers with incorporating different spices and different fruits that reminds them of like a specific memory or a specific um, uh, time in the past. So I think to answer your question, it, it's largely driven by politics and the excise laws and who's in power and what rules they're making, and that defined the culture for the longest time with the craft beer.
And do you see that there's just more of a general overt resistance to change, or do you see that the world is changing? We need to keep up with the world.
I see a lot of resistance to changing. I wish it was the other one. So I mean, if you think the world is changing and you're trying to catch up, it's a different story. But it's hard for people in the space of beer education to you cannot change people because if there's a huge resistance for
Yeah.
change, and that's the biggest challenge because like there's so much good beer out there. You just need to get over that barrier and then start
Yeah.
exploring beer. So that has been a challenge. Yeah, a lot of resistance.
Well, and you brought up something too. Now, granted, you and I are both advanced cicerones. We've spent a lot of time studying styles and the nuance of the styles and how the styles are different and the same and everything. So, I mean, you know your styles really well. What I'm curious about, however, is how you mentioned you have all these wonderful spices and all these wonderful fruits. How are brewers, the craft brewers in India, taking these classic styles and making very Indian variations of them? How are they kind of taking this and making it their own? And do you and sub question, do you see, given 10, 20 years out, do you see that there will be some like India specific styles emerging?
Yeah, I think so. Right now, there's like a really big trend of using local ingredients to make beer in India,
Mm,
specifically the grains. We have like a rich culture of grains, so a lot of farmers, farming lands, agriculture, and I've seen many breweries making beers with these different millets. So
mm,
that I've never seen that, and that was very fascinating. That they're making some saisons with some different kinds of millets and using all those sort of local ingredients or local fruit they harvest and come back during the season and try to brew a beer during the season with that fruit, or trying to incorporate fruit and spice or herb and spice to create some kind of a specific flavor memory from your past of that specific region. So that has been very fascinating for me. So, but in terms of having a set of beer styles, I would love to see like an uh, Indian beer style emerge out of this, hopefully. But it really depends on how you define a beer style, right? So it's not
sure.
just cultural thing, it's not just historic. So it has to be a combination of these that defines a beer style. So um, you know, I really wish that that would happen in the future. But right now we're trying to explore local ingredients and try to create those. I mean, I mean brewers, but some they're trying to create a beer to evoke your sensory those flavor memories that from your past or your cultural heritage. So
And kind of along with that, and granted, the theme of this whole conversation, of course, is that beer experience. But you've had the benefit of traveling to the U.S. You've had the benefit to travel elsewhere, if I remember correctly.
but more importantly, you've been able to try different beers from around the world and kind of compare and contrast. Right? Um, how would you describe if I go to India for the first time and it's like I want to have the the beer experience from India that only I can have only there wherever I am. I'm sure every region's going to be slightly different. How would you describe that experience? What does it even mean? I mean, I'm just going to leave that question right there. I could keep on going, but describe the Indian beer experience for us.
Uh, right now, I don't see that happening. Like specific, there's no certain thing that you can call this is Indian beer experience, because it's so one part of the industry, the beer industry in India, is trying to catch up with the current trends,
Hmm.
and there's another part trying to convince uh, people to change. So
Okay.
so there are people making like, trying to catch up with the styles, and there's people trying like not to change. Like there are like resistance to change. They've been brewing the same beer for the longest time. So I mean, I don't I don't see there's like a specific beer experience right now in India. There might be. So I'm really curious on exploring this segment of if there's like a historical connection that we lost in between about the beer culture, because it's all I knew was the commercial beer when I grew up, and that's it. And I've heard stories of beers being shipped to India from England, but I mean there are no like I haven't read any article. I've seen some pictures. There's not much information out there. Maybe this is something that I need to explore. There might have been some styles back in the day, but right now the beer culture, Indianized beer cultural experience. I would say if you walk into a microbrewery, I don't know. I'm just trying to
Well,
come up with an answer.
let me ask it this way, and maybe I was getting a little too woo woo on that question. If I were to come over to India, where you live, and you're like, hey, right on, let's go to a local craft brewery, and let's go grab something to eat and something to drink. What would I expect, or what can I expect? What would we be eating? What would we be drinking? What are the options besides Belgian wit? Um, what would you recommend I try as a tourist?
As a tourist, you should definitely try beers that are the specialty beers made out of local ingredients. So you and I are exploring beer in India, so I would just take you to some microbreweries that make some interesting beers with, let's say, goza with fruit and some saison with spice and
But
some
what
he-
kind of fruit, what kind of spices would I expect it
um,
to be in there?
it it's mostly seasonal, but
Okay.
if you're there during summer, you see a lot of mango and guava beers, and during the fall, you see some jamun, berry, and probably different winter fruits during the season. So, and obviously spices are there throughout the year, but we see a lot of spiced beers coming up in the fall, in the winter. So, like summer jackfruit is another
Mm,
great fruit, and a
I
lot of
love
people make
jackfruit.
beers with jackfruit.
I love jackfruit.
So, yeah, and we have like hundreds of varieties of mangoes. So people make and each mango tastes different. So it's
Oh
you
wow.
can't just call it mango beer and it's like, oh, this beer is made with this mango, and this beer is made with this mango. So you make like a mango pale ale, or you can make a mango sour. They all taste different. The way mango expresses itself in a beer, uh, it's fascinating because there's like different mangoes coming from different regions. So I think there's a lot of that with interesting local ingredients. Trying to, so I think you should explore beers made. I would. So let me put it this way: when you come to India, you would have an experience with the local ingredients showing up in these beer styles like saisons or gozas, or even pale ales. You'll have an expression of those Indian spice or Indian fruit, Indian ingredients.
And you not likely to find that anywhere else in the world, I suspect.
Yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't say you wouldn't find it, but maybe you wouldn't find the freshest version of that.
Yeah. Um, what are your plans? I mean, I'm sorry. Let me rewind that a little bit. Um, as you are now an advanced cicerone, the first advanced cicerone in the country of India, and you're a beer educator, and you have this burgeoning craft beer scene. What are your plans to kind of help foster the growth of this emerging beer culture?
Um, Trying to sit down with the brewers and the breweries and understand what their plans are in putting out the beers so that I'll have a better understanding on what these breweries are coming up with, and I then I should paint a picture to the public about if there's that specific beer style that no one has heard of, or if there's like a specific flavor interaction that I need to talk about. So my plan is to make communications better by bridging those gaps with language, gaps with understanding beer styles. Um, so yeah, so my plan is to keep keep the beer education, keep moving forward with the beer education, try to be as visual as you can with the education, try to be more practical, do more tastings, host more workshops for beer enthusiasts. So we have these groups on Facebook that are 10,000 people strong. So we have a culture of these enthusiasts trying to get out of their bubble and um, uh, trying different beers, supporting local breweries. So I we run this group called Friends of Froth on Facebook. So that's where we communicate to the larger set of craft beer audience. Because if you look at the entire country, the craft beer drinking people are not even like 0.1%. So it's
Yeah.
that small. That's tiny. So the commercial beer is still ruling the market. So I think it's my responsibility as a beer educator to find those craft beer audience, and take this forward because I can't do it by myself.
Yeah.
So I need to create more of this culture of beer educators who go forward and create those better experiences for customers. So that was the main intention of starting staff training at breweries, because I want to establish a system in these breweries so that they wouldn't require anyone. They have a system in place for beer education. Whenever they have a new beer coming on tap, they have this sensory training, and they do it more often about with their regular beers. And how do you communicate better? So keep asking questions to your customers, like what do they like, what do they not like. If your audience says, I've been drinking commercial beer all my life, like how do you make sure that uh, they can take that leap? So you gotta ask questions like, what do you like? Okay, if you like something like a light lager, so we have a we have a Helles, we have a Pilsner, so we have something similar but that tastes better. So how do you communicate that? And if you're a person who loves these seasonal fruits, and talk about a beer that has that
Yeah.
kind of replicates that experience with that seasonal fruit, or like if you cook a lot with spices, like we have something interesting that you can relate to, because you said you like cooking, so we're gonna bring you a beverage that has the creates those kind of same flavor experiences. So how do you do that? So that's like you keep asking questions, try to know your audience better. You ask better questions, and then that's the way you can help them better. So I've seen most breweries jumping right into the topic. I was like, hey, what can I get for you? And then that's it.
Yeah.
And it's like, or they recommend beers without even asking questions for like what do you like, what you don't like. No, and they're just like, okay, we Belgian wit is our bestseller, and we want to sell that, you know.
Yeah.
And if I look back, why there's a trend, why people are loving these styles, it's like one, it's highly drinkable, sessionable, and Belgian wit has fruit and spice, orange, coriander, and everyone can relate to that
Hmm.
in India.
Yep.
So I
And
think
it's
it's
easy
that,
drinking, delicious, and complex, and
yeah.
easy to drink, and just.
I
And
think
it
as long
sounds like. Sorry. Go ahead.
as, yeah, as long as you give people something that they can relate to, you're that's I think that's a sweet spot. So like you gotta
Yeah.
make them relate to something
Yeah. I,
in
I,
their
I
own
find
culture.
that kind of making those connections and leading them one step. It's that classic. If you like that, taste this, type of thing. Not like, oh, you like Belgian wit? Here, try this bourbon barrel aged imperial stout, type of thing. That's just too much of a leap. Yeah, most times I found I've tried that with a group of people. Oh, this is amazing! Try that, and they just put this look on their face like, oh, that's disgusting. How can you drink that? My bad. You're not ready for this yet. So we'll get there.
Talk about the exciting parts of that specific beer. So I see that happen a lot with IPAs in India. I don't know, for some reason, for most people, first thing that comes into mind with IPAs is they're bitter. So uh, it's hard to pass that barrier. And
Yeah.
as a staff, as a waiter, it's like if you're trying to communicate your IPA, that should not be the first thing to talk about. You know, like, hey, this is a bitter beer. Like, you should not do that. Because, like, the moment you say it's a bitter beer, it's a huge turn off.
Yeah.
So,
Why
talk about
why
all
would
the
I
good.
drink that? That
Yeah.
sounds awful. I don't want that.
So, for people who doesn't know what an IPA is, bitterness should not be the first thing that you communicate to your audience. So, you should talk about all the good things that excites them. Like, talk about those fruit flavors that the hops bring out.
Yeah,
Or
people want to
talk.
drink beers that give their palate a big hug, not kind of punch it in the nose, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can give them a heads up that's going to be a little more bitter than the other beers that you offer, but it should not be like the driving factor of describing that beer.
Yeah.
You should talk about all those interesting, wonderful flavors, fruity flavors that you get out of these IPAs, and then you can probably say, like, would you like to try a sample? Like, this is a little bit more bitter, so before you order a full pint, I would like to give you a sampler. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, giving them the taster is the biggest win for me. It's like if you want your customers to come back, if you want them to feel safe, if you want them to feel relatable, if you want them to feel heard, give them the samplers. Let them decide.
One of the things I love doing, whether I give someone a sample of an IPA or a sour or something, if I see that they kind of ruffle up their nose and you can tell that they're not really into that beer, instead of just saying, "Oh, okay, well, let's try something else instead," I love trying to reframe how they view that. I'm not trying to convince them to enjoy an IPA if they don't like an IPA, but I love giving that to them, seeing that they don't like it, saying, okay, so that's how it tastes like this. Now, taste that again with this piece of food and notice how it changes. So I'm trying to pique their interest. I'm not trying to sell them on the beer. I'm just trying to help them experience, oh, this is not a one note, one flavor, one aroma wonder. It's something to be experienced and it changes. I find a great deal of giddiness when I can bring someone through that little short experience. It's fun.
Exactly. I think this is where it's very important to like communicate, keeping the cultural things in mind. Because if there's an IPA that has like this kind of this candied orange, so talk about that specific brand of those candies that were popular when you were a kid, and it's
Hmm.
like, oh, this tastes like those hard candies that I used to eat. So it's about those communications, like how can you improve those communications. So you don't have to talk a lot about that beer. You just have to say just one single thing, and that's it. So I would say, like, for something like, for there's a guava goza with salt and chilies that I had at one of the local breweries. That was amazingly good, and it had black salt and chili with guava. It just reminded me of the the a snack, a fruit snack I was having when I was a kid on the streets. That had like a cut slice of guava with like black salt and chilies. It just reminded me of that, and so I went back uh, with that memory, and then there's like I was sitting down at the brewery and just having this beer and like really enjoying it, and I was looking at a bunch of dudes walk in trying to get or order beer, and then I was looking at them and they were confused. They wanted to know what beer they should drink, and they asked me what you're drinking. I'm like, uh, I told them this one thing, that this beer just reminds me of my experience with this guava fruit sprinkled with salt and chilies, and that's it. I didn't say anything about the beer. That's like no other descriptions. I just told that specific memory, and they ordered it. They loved it.
Yeah.
So it's like, how can you connect with those memories? And um, it's not easy. Beer communication.
You led them on a flavor journey, and
Yeah,
that's cool. That's a good
yeah,
story.
yeah.
Um, so you may have already prepped for these final questions. You may have heard these, um, but I'm just going to kind of lead into our kind of a wrap up session. But luckily tomorrow on Anudeep, you get to be king of the entire beer world for an entire day. What's the first thing you would like to change?
Mandate beer education in breweries. I
Excellent.
think, yeah, it's very important to do that.
Yeah.
You got to communicate better with your
Now, is
beer.
that just for staff? Is that for all staff? Is that for staff and consumers?
If you do that with staff, they're gonna take care of it with the consumers.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Love it. Um, so at the end of your royal day as king of the beer world, you get the world is going to fly you anywhere you want to go and give you whatever you want to drink and whatever you want to eat. So where would you go and what are you going to have?
Man, that's um
It's too big of a menu, isn't it?
I'll go down to the beach and uh, have this really fresh seafood with some really nice saison.
All right. Awesome.
I love
Uh,
saisons.
I I I am a huge fan of saisons too, and when I think about what I would answer that question, it changes day to day, moment to moment. But
It
right now,
does.
I'm with you with seafood. And um, the big question is you spend a lot of time studying beer, teaching about beer. You invested your life into beer. Why does good beer matter? Why does it matter so much to you?
It matters because it's not just about creating those flavor experiences. I think it's about bringing people together from different cultures. So beer is one of the ways of expression uh, to bring people of different cultures together.
And
So
this video, this podcast, this audio, whichever you're listening to, this is a good case in point. You know, you're from India, I'm from the northwest of the U.S., and here we are, kind of having this conversation about beer.
yeah, if it
It's a
wasn't
wonderful
for a
thing.
good beer, we wouldn't have been here.
I know, because bad beer wouldn't bring us together. It'd have to be something else. If anyone's
Absolutely.
listening, if they're curious and they want to know more about you and what you're doing, or about beer in India, where could they go to connect?
Instagram, Facebook, I'm at Abierguy. Um, It's Abierguy, and I have a website. It's abierguy.com, so you can follow me there as well.
Awesome. And last thing, do you have any calls to action or any final words you want to share with anyone listening and watching?
Uh, I have a podcast that I forgot to mention. It's called At the Beer Savages. It's available on all these platforms. So we talk about beers from Indian perspective, the trends in India, beer culture in India, and we bring in some guests. It's not been active in the last few months because of my whole travel, and we're trying to
You've
bring it
been
back
busy.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, trying to bring it back up with Indian brewers and more of that Indian-driven beer culture podcast.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear more about that and see how things develop in the years and decades to come with beer specific to India. When you mentioned the 100 different varieties of mango, you had my attention because I love mango, but I've only tasted one kind, and so
That's right.
I am immensely curious at this point, especially with the black salt and the chilies. You had me at hello.
So many great things.
Right, Anudeep, it's so nice to see you again face to face, at least on video. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you for becoming an Advanced Cicerone and helping me along my journey. That's a little selfish plug. You were there, part of this group, and helped me get over that hurdle, and I'm immensely grateful for that. But thank you for coming on and sharing this experience you have with the rest of us who are curious and want to know more. But thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're doing for the industry. It's a lot.
It is honestly my pleasure. But thank you for saying so.
Thank you.
As we travel the world, or at least watch travel shows from our couch, we gain a sense of other cultures. Like Anthony Bourdain told us, you learn a lot about someone when you share a meal together. Just make sure you wash it down with a great beer from wherever you are. In the next episode, we visit with the beer writer to discuss war, words, and the uniqueness of Ukrainian beer. I'm on a virtual tour of the craft and culture of beer around the globe. I've put Good Beer Matters